First, we're going to talk about electric vehicles and an often overlooked advantage of EVs that many people haven't seen. And it's a big safety benefit. Then we're going to look at real estate and housing costs, what to expect for the future. And there's two pieces of information that are very obvious what's going to happen with housing prices over the next 18 to 24 months. And last, we'll talk about some fraud cases. One has to do with cyber attacks and what's happening with the hackers that are out there kind of ramping up for another big attack, and also some more generic corporate fraud. So first, let's take a look at an EV advantage that many people, including myself, really hadn't considered for why an EV has an advantage. This is from Automotive News. EV shift has changed Autolive's airbags. Autolive is a company that makes airbags for vehicles. And what they're finding is the fact that EV interiors are bigger and they don't have as much mechanical equipment. You don't have a shifter. The steering wheel doesn't have to be as connected to mechanicals, meaning that they can have bigger airbags without adding weight. So here's an example of a huge airbag that pops up. More spacious interiors with occupants sitting farther from a dashboard and reduced space within that dashboard. So you have quite a narrow space to put the airbag, but you have to be creative. What you can do is make that airbag a much larger pillow to protect the whole interior. And this company, Autolive, is having new products that come out the third quarter, which even create more airbag protection. So this is an advantage that many times has been overlooked as to why the design and architecture of an EV might be better. One other area is you don't have the same kind of vibrations. Internal combustion engines vibrate because there's literally internal combustion. There's 8 cylinders or 4 cylinders or 6 cylinders. Each one of those is having a small explosion thousands of times a minute. If your engine operates at 2,000 or 3,000 RPMs, RPM stands for revolutions per minute. So every minute the engine revolves and all 4, 6, or 8 of those cylinders has an explosion. So there may be tens of thousands of explosions every minute inside of an ICE engine. Those vibrations have to be isolated within the engine. Even though they have all kind of engine mounts and motor mounts, a lot of them translate into the vehicle. So the vehicle architecture has to be set up in a way where there are actually breakpoints between different components. You have your front suspension, your engine mounts have to be separated. So there's a lot more movement and flex and shear points. With a vehicle that's electric, you don't have to have those shear points. The entire vehicle can be solid together. If you did that with a gasoline or diesel vehicle, all those little vibrations would translate inside the vehicle. For that reason, EVs can be much more solid. The entire chassis and frame and body panels can all be one solid unit without any mounting points in between. If you looked underneath a gasoline vehicle, you will see where every major substructure of the vehicle mounts to each other, there's a little rubber gasket. There's a rubber mount. So where the, let's say, front end mounts to the center of the vehicle, those two pieces of metal come together and there's a rubber gasket in between, which means there's a little bit of flex and that can move. It's by design, so you don't get all that vibration from the engine or the drivetrain or the mechanicals coming in the vehicle. Electric vehicles don't need as much of that. And the other reason it makes it quieter is your entire batteries in the floor, you don't need as much floor sound deadening as you do in a gasoline vehicle. In a gasoline vehicle, that floor is solid metal. You have to put kind of rubberized undercoating or sound deadening inside and outside the vehicle to keep all those road noises outside so it's quiet inside. EVs have a 3 or 4 inch thick battery in the floor. That keeps those road noises outside the vehicle. So the architecture and design of an electric vehicle, by definition, can be stronger, stiffer, quieter than a gasoline vehicle. And you'll see manufacturers, as they design more chassis exclusive for EVs, will take advantage of this. If you have a plug-in hybrid, You can't do any of this because a plug-in hybrid still has a gasoline engine driving the vehicle. The plug-in hybrid part is an add-on to an existing gas vehicle. Pure electrics don't have to have any of this accommodations for this mechanical drivetrain in the vehicle. If you've not driven or ridden in a pure electric vehicle, try one out. Rent one for a day at a rental place. Test drive one at a dealership just to see the difference. Now, you may not be ready to buy an EV yet. There's still a lot of questions about battery health, longevity, even things like charging, range anxiety. Are you going to get to where you got to get to without having to recharge for 2 hours? There's still a lot of that out there. And there's also not the same wide range of electric vehicle models that there are gas. So you may not find a vehicle that's the type that you like, the body style, the number of seats, what have you. Or your lifestyle may not match having to charge up every 200 miles. But try one out, because as more models become available, as the charging infrastructure grows out over the next year or two, if you know in advance how these vehicles work, how the ride and drive of them, it will help you start to formulate a decision on how to do this. Because look, EVs are coming. By the end of this decade, they will be the majority of new vehicles sold. Doesn't matter what state you're in. We talked yesterday about how Jeep is not sending gas vehicles to 14 states and how that's going to expand. So 2027, 2028, you're going to be shopping for a car. Instead of having the majority of gas vehicles and a few EVs, it'll be the other way around. It'll be mostly EVs and a few gas vehicles. So if you've already planned ahead and thought about it, you'll start to have some better understanding. You won't be caught flat-footed. Another thing to do is, over the next couple years, if you have any electrical work done on your house, you put in a new outlet, electrician comes out to fix something or change something, go ahead and put in at least a circuit for a charger, EV charger in your garage. The circuit is not going to be that much money. You're probably going to need somewhere between 3 and 10 feet of very thick gauge wire, 00 or number 2 wire from your electrical box, your breaker box, to where the device is going to go. You can have that wire terminate into just an empty device box. All you need is the conductor, which is what they call wire in the electrical industry, tied into your box, run through a conduit or through the wall into a terminating device box. You don't even have to have the plug there yet. But if you do that, then it's very easy to put in that plug at a later date. And the majority of the cost of putting in that circuit is the labor and service call. If you already have the electrician coming out to your house, the service call is done. The extra labor, the box is going to be already open. So there's no labor to do that. To tie those 3 leads or 4 leads into your system, the neutral, the ground, and 1 or 2 hot leads, probably 2, 1 on each side of the circuit. So you have 240. It's cheap to do, right? It may cost $100, but at least now you have the circuit. If at a later date you want to put the plug in, you can buy the plugs online on Amazon for $50-$60. And whether you want to attach that yourself, if it's allowable or not, you can do that much easier later. So if you have that EV charging already set up, it's not going to be a scramble, a rush to do it later, and it'll be a lot cheaper. What's some bad news about EVs? Well, we've talked about this before, but another article came out about batteries. According to this auto expert, Tesla's Model Y battery pack has 0 repairability. Minor collision can junk the car. So we'll get into the article, but and you've seen this before on our channel. Here's the problem. The battery in an electric vehicle is the most expensive, high-value part of the electric vehicle. If you look at this car, you see on this floor pan, if you imagine the entire floor of the vehicle, big rectangle, is entirely battery, and it's probably 6 to 8 inches thick. That battery is all the value of the vehicle. In a gas vehicle, you have an engine, transmission, drivetrain, all that's expensive. Look, the sheet metal and the glass and all this part of the vehicle is relatively inexpensive. The parts, right? Now, if you get into an accident, the labor to fix that is expensive, but the parts are relatively cheap. Think about the thin piece of metal on a door. It's not that much money, a few $100. On a gas vehicle, the engine, it could be 10,000. Transmission could be 4 or 5,000. Drivetrain could be a few thousand. That's expensive. On an EV, the battery could be 15 or 20,000. Matter of fact, the article talks about it, right? The article talks about how batteries can be 10, 15, $20,000 for a replacement. So that's where your value is. So what's the problem? It's the same as an engine on a car. Well, it is to some extent. However, there's a lot more vulnerability and sensitivity to an EV battery. Like we talked about earlier, gas vehicles are designed for vibration. There's combustion that happens inside of a internal combustion engine. That's the definition of the engine. So there's combustion in there every single second. So that engine is designed for vibration, and it's structurally sound. If you look at an engine block, it's a solid piece of metal. You could hit it with a hammer and nothing's going to happen. A battery is much more sensitive. It's electronics. It's soft. It's not a solid piece of metal you can go banging away at. So what does that mean? If somebody hits you in the side, look right here. If you imagine this mouse as a car side impact, if it pushes in right here on the bottom, that battery is going to get crushed in, physically damaged. The battery on a Tesla is considered to be, see if they have the name here. It's called a structural integral component. Tesla structural battery pack, right? What that means is the battery is structural. The battery is part of the frame of the vehicle. So if a vehicle's in an accident, the structure is damaged, meaning the battery is damaged. In addition, a battery might be damaged even without being structurally impinged or structurally dented. How could that happen? Well, if you hit the front of the vehicle, even if it doesn't technically physically impinge or structurally dent the battery, that vibration, that impact, that shock can rattle the inside of the battery, and there's little fine connectors. There's small pieces of metal that connect one cell to another. There's conducting straps and little wires and small thin metal terminals. Even going over a big bump can shake some of those loose. We've seen stories where batteries have become failure devices because of some vibration or some shock or going over a bump or getting hit in the front or the rear. And that's why you want to have your battery tested on a used EV if you're buying it. Even if the vehicle was never in an accident, doesn't have a lot of miles, the shock to a battery can affect it even as much or more so than a physical damage or even mileage. Imagine if you took your phone and you dropped your phone on the ground from 10 feet. The phone might not work. Even if you don't see damage, yeah, your screen might get cracked, but those small electrical terminals and conductors and circuitry in the phone can be damaged. Well, your battery in your electric vehicle is like a big phone. It has a lot of potential to be damaged. And they talk about how, it can be difficult to repair after an accident. Tesla is especially at risk, but not only Tesla, any EV. But Teslas can go straight to the grinder, according to this, right? That's one of the downsides. You want to make sure that you're testing your battery on a regular basis. If you get into any kind of minor fender bender, even if the body shop fixes the front end, fixes the back end, have the battery tested to make sure there's not internal damage that you can't see. Because if you have your vehicle body structurally repaired, or if you have the collision repair done, if you don't catch that battery failure right then, if 6 months, a year, year and a half later, the battery fails, you're not going to be able to put it under insurance because now it's going to be deemed, well, that's a mechanical issue. You want to find that damage and that insurance liability when the event happens so you don't get jammed up with an insurance issue down the road. And this is not just Tesla, any electric vehicle or even a hybrid for that matter. If you have a hybrid that goes over a big bump, gets hit, has some impact to it, gets dropped off of a tow truck, you might want to check out to see if that hybrid or EV battery is in good shape or not. So next, we're going to talk about how real estate is going to become much more problematic for buyers. We're going to talk about how even high to upper middle class people may not be able to buy a primary residence if they use the same strategy they've been looking at for the last 5 or 10 years. There may be a different strategy needed to purchase a residential primary residence. So we'll be back in about 2 seconds and we'll talk about that. Well, here we go. According to this article from The Hill, the average American income may not cut it. And we're talking about expenses in general, but also real estate. The average American income isn't enough for a comfortable living in 2023. So what's the average income? Well, according to the U.S. Census, the typical U.S. family earns about $71,000 a year. So you can compare how much you make compared to $71,000. Yet the average American believes that a family needs $85,000 in household income to get by, not to be rich, not to be wealthy, to get by. What does that mean? Well, if you make $85,000 in total income minus 20% taxes, that leaves you with $68,000. And $68,000 may not be enough to afford a comfortable home, with a mortgage rate and property taxes and the current value of homes. May not be enough to afford a new car. Right now, new cars, the average price is about $46,000. $46,000 on a 5-year loan gives you about $1,000 a month for a car payment. Well, if you make $68,000 a year take home, right, that boils down to about $1,200 to $1,400 a week. Well, if that's the case, 1 week of your take-home pay pays for your car and insurance. Right? Think about that. You work the whole week to pay for your car. That's not sustainable because you have another 2 weeks to pay for your house and maybe the last week to pay for utilities. Leaves you nothing left in insurance. This is a very sobering analysis. Inflation, which used to be a negligible factor, now is something that has eaten up a lot of people's income. Insurance in some places have eaten up a lot of people's income. So if you live, let's say, in Florida, you may find your homeowner's insurance has gone up by double, triple, maybe 2,000 or 3,000 a year up until a few years ago. And now it could be 5,000 or 6,000 or 7,000 a year. We've seen stories where people are spending 8,000 a year for their homeowner's insurance. Right? That's $700 a month just for insurance on your house, not counting your car. What about real estate market? Well, this is a subscription website, so we don't see the whole story, but it said in the month of May, it was the lowest housing inventory in a decade. So you might think, well, houses are overpriced and, there's going to be a housing crisis. Well, if the number of homes for sale is at the lowest point in a decade, it's unlikely we're on the cusp of a housing crash, right? It may be that houses are overpriced and people can't buy them, but if there's no inventory, it really doesn't matter. Remember, we talked about this yesterday. In order for the price of homes or any one home to go down for that matter, there are two people that need to agree on that lower price, the buyer and the seller. Just because the buyer can't afford it or is unwilling to pay 600,000 for the house, let's say, and they think it's only worth 380, until the seller also agrees with you as a buyer, and ain't going to sell for 380. No matter what the market says, no matter what the buyer says, no matter what the mortgage company says, no matter what the appraisal says. If the appraisal comes in at 375, if the seller doesn't want to sell it, they're going to keep it. And many sellers can't sell, even if they wanted to, because their mortgage rate is so low and their purchase price basis is so low. Look, if that house that's selling for 600, if they paid 350 for it 5 years ago, the most that they owe on it is 350. It's the most that they owe. They probably owe less than that if they, paid some mortgage payments. So if they sell it and they buy a more expensive house, now instead of paying a mortgage on 350, they got to pay a mortgage on a higher amount. Plus, they have 3% interest rate right now, and they're probably going to go to 6 or 7. So instead of spending, let's say, $1,500 or $1,800 a month on a mortgage, their mortgage payment is going to jump up to maybe $4,000, $5,000. And who's going to do that in their right mind, especially when their car payment on their new car is $1,000? So until the sellers also agree we want to sell for cheap, housing prices are not going anywhere. In fact, if the housing inventory continues to be non-existent, housing prices might even go up, even with interest rates at a higher level, because the one elephant in the room that nobody knows about is how much pent-up demand is there? How many of those buyers that were out there doing multiple offers on properties with a open house that had 50 people winding around the block looking at houses, how many of those people who didn't buy in 2020 or 21 or 22 still want to buy a house and have now figured out, well, I got to bite the bullet. I can't stay in my apartment. My landlord raised my rent from $3,000 to $4,000. I don't want to throw money away on rent anymore, right? Maybe they saved up a little more down payment. Maybe their income went up a little bit. How many of those pent-up demand buyers need to come into the market to keep the prices at the current level? Look, if you're a buyer, everybody wants the prices to come down, right? If you're a buyer, everybody wants and wishes for prices to come down. And a lot of people think the prices are overheated. It's a bubble. Maybe it is. Maybe it is. Maybe the prices don't reflect what the properties are worth. Maybe the house doesn't deserve to sell for that much. That $600,000 house that sold for 380, 4 years ago, maybe it doesn't deserve to sell for 600. But until the owner of that house decides I'm going to sell it for less than 600, and ain't going to sell for less than 600. It's either going to sell for 600 or it's not going to sell until that person decides to. And look, there's factors that will make a person sell a house for any price. If they're in financial distress, if they lost their job, if they have to move to another state, there's a lot of reasons that might happen. But those distress reasons are not as common as people think. Sure, there's going to be somebody that gets a divorce, has to sell their house, that needs money because they're going bankrupt. They have to sell their house. It's not as common, especially since many, many people won the interest rate lottery in 2018. And what that means is, doesn't matter what your interest rate was on your mortgage before 2018, in 2018, you could refinance, and almost everybody did. If you bought your house in 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, any time in the last 10 years before 2018, your rate was higher. It was 4%, 5%, maybe 6%. Well, when the rates went down in 2.5 or 3% in 2018, you refinanced and you reset the clock on your mortgage. Now, you're not going to give away that lottery ticket just because you want to do something different, unless you have to. Remember, the housing crash in 2008, 2009, housing prices went down, but they didn't go down as much as people think. They went down 15, 20%, maybe some markets 30%. And by 2011 or 12, they were right back up where they were. That blip that went down recovered in a couple years. And the most important thing is, in that event, that crisis, that tsunami of financial distress, there was actual financial distress. There were people who had 2 or 3 houses with interest only loans that really weren't qualified to buy the house. Their mortgage qualification was, you can fog a mirror, you get a mortgage. And so people had 2 or 3 homes that they bought with, interest only payments, low interest rate. And all of a sudden now housing crash comes and they got to sell them because their interest rate now jumps up without, involuntarily. So people had to sell. Even with all that pressure, it only went down 15, 20% and it bounced right back up. Right now, there's not that much pressure, right? Don't, shoot the messenger. This is just observation of what the financial realities are. So we're going to jump now to some questions about fraud. And, if you've been a victim of some type of a fraud, this may be of interest. And we see this a lot in our investigative division. And what happens with fraud is you never know it's a fraud until you've lost your money. And here is a very good piece from ACFE, which we're a member of. Matter of fact, we're on the board of one of their local chapters, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners. And this is a great organization. It helps people recover from fraud, prevent fraud. And this article has a lot of good stats. It's estimated that fraud in the U.S. exceeds $1 trillion annually, or 5% of total revenues. That equates to 2,700 $1 million frauds every single day. So in theory, there are almost 3,000 frauds every day that occur for $1 million. Well, we don't disagree with that. How do we know? We get a couple hundred calls a day from people who have been victims of fraud. And many of them put their money into some supposed investment scheme. Maybe it was, cryptocurrency. Maybe it was some real estate deal. Maybe it was some special secret algorithm that makes money, some AI that buys stocks. They're convinced by somebody that this investment, this deal is special, and they're going to get in on the ground floor and make a lot of money. How do they convince smart people to do it? We have victims that are attorneys, doctors, accountants, professionals, executives, and normal everyday working class people. What happens is the fraudsters, the scammers, are very slick. What they do is they don't jump in right away and say, give us money. What they do, and if this sounds like your story, you can attest to this in the comments, is they will contact you through some other channel, usually social media. It could be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. And they'll start with a conversation that has nothing to do with fraud, nothing to do with investments, nothing to do with finances. It may be a dating site. It may be a relationship inquiry. It may be some other club. You might be in a chess playing club, or you might be in a off-road Jeep club, or any kind of social organization, maybe religious, maybe a church. And they'll start a conversation with you on that subject, and they'll talk to you for days, weeks, sometimes even months will go by, and they'll have this conversation with you. What you don't know behind the scenes is this person is probably communicating with thousands of people across the world and starting this conversation. And then one day, what'll happen is this fraudster will post a picture on social media. They'll post an event or whatever it is, with usually a photo of them enjoying some kind of very luxury event, maybe a nice meal, a nice dinner, maybe a flashy car, maybe a vacation, maybe in the background is a beach in Tahiti somewhere. And they say, congratulate me on this, whatever, vacation, my new car, out to dinner, spa treatment, whatever. I just made a bunch of money on this investment. And so the purpose of the post has nothing to do with trying to pull you into an investment. It's still in that social conversational context that you've had with that person. It's them wanting you to share their joy in this reward. It's them trying to get you to be appreciative of them vicariously, maybe to be a little jealous of how well they have it that day. As you know, social media, people post pictures at their best. You don't see people posting pictures when they're at their worst. But this is an extreme of that. Sometimes they'll even look like they're on a private jet. And sometimes these photos are either done with a green screen or with a fake background, or sometimes they'll just rent a luxury car for a day for a few $100s and make that their photo shoot. Sometimes they'll go to a place that has a mock-up of a cabin of a private jet. It's not even a real jet, and they can sit inside and look out the window and hold up champagne. So that's step one. Step one is to show some big event. Now, and you're going to say, wow, this is somebody who I know. I've known them for weeks or months, and they have this huge, very dramatic, significant financial windfall, right? It's somebody you can relate to because you feel like you know them. You think you're in a relationship with them, or a friendship or a partnership, or they're a colleague. And this is somebody real to you that you have a little bit of trust with. You've never met them in person, but you know their life, they know your life. And now here they are with some windfall of tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars right in front of you. And it makes it real. It makes it believable. So this is where you start to get into the ether of the psychology of a fraud. And so they're not going to ask you for any money. They're not going to ask you to put money in. All they're going to do is they want you to celebrate their event. And you will. Hey, congratulations. Oh my God, I can't believe it. This is great. Have a great day. You're blessed. Whatever you say is how it's going to work. And then a day or two will go by, and you might be curious and ask, well, gee, how did you do this? What's the investment? And they're going to play hard to get. They're going to say, well, it's just something, that I did on the side. And they're going to go right back to the conversation that you were talking about, your chess club, your 4-wheel drive club, your church, your relationship, whatever it is. They're going to try to avoid the conversation. They're going to be teasing you a little bit. It's kind of like takeaway, right? It's teasing you with something like you would with a dog, teasing him with a treat and then pulling it back, because they want you to ask about it more. It's very insidious, very psychological. So maybe another few days goes by and you say, well, gee, tell me more about this. And if you don't take the bait, they're going to know how to dangle it again, right? They may post another picture. They might drop a hint in the comments that they're talking to you. But eventually you're going to ask them, what is this deal? What is this investment? How'd you do it? That's what you want to know. How did you do it? Because if you're connected with this person and they seem at the same level as you, you're going to look at it like, well, if you can do it, what's the punchline? Then I can do it, right? It's not some big time billionaire executive that you have nothing in common with, no similarity with, that you can't even imagine how they did it. This is somebody and you're going to be psychologically triggered. Like, how did you do it? Because if you can do it, I can do it. And they're going to start dropping a hint. Well, it's this thing I ran across, a year or so ago that's been making me a lot of money. And they're going to make it seem like something separate from them, something distant from them, and maybe a long time investment. And they're going to drag it out longer, a couple days, a week or two. And finally, they're going to get to the point where either you beg it out of them or they're going to put it in front of you. And they're going to say, well, here's the deal. It's XYZ investments. It's a great thing, but I don't think that they're not doing any new customers right now. Well, please put in a good word for me, you're going to say. Eventually, they're going to put you together with this investment, not representing that they have anything to do with it. They're just a customer like you. You and this person are shoulder to shoulder, colleagues. And that company then is going to be in contact with you. And they're going to say, yep, we have this investment. It's a really good deal. You can double your money in a month. Start out small. And they're going to ask you for a small amount of money, few hundred, few thousand, maybe. Not a lot. That's the important thing. They want to start out small So you send them $500 and they send you account statements every month. And the next month it might show 850, and a month later it might show 1400, and your money's going to go up really, really fast. And at some point, one of two things will happen. You might say, "Hey, I want to take my money out," or you might say, um, or if you don't say anything, they'll ask you for more money. If you ask them to take money out, they're going to say, "Well, you have 1400 in right now. If you had 3000 in, you could double that in a month because there's a special program for over 3000, and you'll have 6000 to take out. So if you can afford to wait a few weeks, you can go from 1400 to 6000. So now you're going to send them another $1600 to make it at that level. And they're going to keep soliciting money from you with stories of higher levels get better returns, or maybe if you try to take money out, you have to pay a tax, or you have to pay an audit fee, or you have to pay some kind of duty or customs or whatever it is. And they have all the stories to tell you to keep getting more money. And we've had people that have started with 500, 800, $1,000 that eventually has sent them hundreds of thousands of dollars of their money. In fact, some victim investors have borrowed money to put more in. They started out with, 5,000, 10,000. They keep adding more. Their bank accounts are now empty, but they see their account that they have with this scam company. The statement they send, which is completely made up, it's completely, fraudulent, says, "I have $280,000 in." And they say, if you had 300,000 in, you could double that in a month and have 600,000. So what they do is they take a home equity loan, or they hit their credit cards, or they borrow from their friends, or they find a way to borrow some money, and they send that to the scammer. And then of course that money's gone. The numbers that you see on the statements are all made up. It's all Photoshop. There's no money anywhere. They just take the money and spend it. It's sitting in any account. And so eventually the victim will either run out of money, can't get any more, or just decide that they had enough. They try to get their money back, and then of course the problem starts. They get ghosted. They're told that they have to pay a duty, pay a fee, and now they realize they've been scammed, and they try to get their money back. And that's where they come to us, and we try to do fraud investigation, asset recovery. Maybe they go to the government, but we've talked about in other videos how that works. So this is a good example of where one case actually went to federal prosecution. It was $3 million. And the takeaway from this article is the government doesn't take these cases unless the feds require two things. The amount had to be material, mean a lot of money, and the evidence had to support 95% probability of conviction. So if you call up the FBI or your local police or the sheriff and say, "Look, I lost $100,000 with this fraud case. They're bad guys. Go get them." They're going to say, "Well, first of all, the amount of money is not material. It's not enough money for us to deal with. And second of all, we don't have any evidence, and we're not going to go get it." So you have to hand them the evidence. So what happens with cases that are prosecuted is, number one, the amount of money is big time, millions of dollars. Number two, it's best evidence I've ever seen. That's where this investigator gave the FBI good evidence, the best evidence I've ever seen, right? And it has to be what they call on a silver platter. It can't be just hunch or stuff they have to do the work for. And even when that happens, it still took, where does it show the time? This was a fast track case. It took 2 years to go through the legal system. So on the public entity side, the public sector side, meaning government, FBI, SEC, whatever, it takes a long time. On the private sector side, meaning attorneys, investigators, ACFE, it can go faster, but the difference is public sector does it for free. Private sector, you got to pay, right? So this is the reality of fraud. And we see it all the time. 2,700, $1 million frauds. We probably see, a dozen a day, hear about, maybe more, maybe a couple dozen a day. So this happens quite a bit. What's another type of fraud? Well, we'll talk about this briefly. And this is cyber hacking. Cyber hacking. And the threat actors, those are the hackers, are back to big game hunting. No space for complacency around Russia, rates, and more, insurers warn. So ransomware attacks have been back on the up in 2023, following a lull. So they were big time in 2019, 2020, 2021, and 22. There were still some, but it kind of dropped off a little bit. And they think it's because Russia and Ukraine, the war was really taking hold, and a lot of the hackers are from Eastern Europe. So they had other things to worry about than hacking. Well, now, since there's a lull, there's been an uptick in ransomware activity towards the beginning of this year. A lot of the threat actors have now refocused. They're doing big game hunting. And we talked yesterday about how a hospital was put out of business, because of a hack. They were taken over by hackers. They couldn't get paid from Medicare, Medi-Cal, from the insurance companies, and they couldn't get their accounts receivable handled, and so they had to go out of business. But the good news is insureds, meaning that you as a client, are much better prepared and positioned to either prevent attack or recover quickly because of certain cyber insurance products that are out there. There's been a decent sized uptick in those kind of attacks. Further claims expected as activity heats up. So if you are a business person, don't get a false sense of security. These hacks and ransomware attacks are probably going to move up a little bit more. And as the bigger fish, like they talked about big game hunting, start to get a little bit more resilient, you may find the hackers start to pick on lower, mid-level, small type companies, because it doesn't take much. Look, if they spend a couple days on a hack and they can extract $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 ransom from a small company, it's worth it, right? Just like if you had a project, a client that came to you and said, look, spend 2 or 3 days doing whatever work you do, and we'll give you 20 grand. You take that case, you take that deal, you take that project. Hackers do the same thing. If they can hack a small company, get them to write a check for $15,000, $20,000 or put it in Bitcoin, it's worth it. So you may see some of those that that become more prominent. What's the bigger picture on finances? Well, obviously, no one has a crystal ball. No one knows what's going to happen with the economy. Some people say we'll have inflation. Some people say we'll have a recession. Some people say we'll have both. Some people say that incomes and payrolls going to go up. Some people say that the stock market's going to crash, housing market's going to crash. Nobody has a crystal ball. One of the things that's very important as a strategy is prepare yourself for if things go bad or even if they don't. Prepare yourself so that you'll be in good shape if things go bad or even if you don't. How do you do that? Well, just continue to be smart. Make as much money as you can. Put some away. Enjoy life. Don't be afraid of every, shadow under the bed or every potential, spooky thing that's out there. But at the same time, be smart and cautious about adding more risk to your lifestyle. You don't want to have more risk than is necessary. You can't have zero risk, but you don't want to have any that's excessive. One of the things the military does very well is anytime they do any kind of mission or activity, doesn't have to be a big mission. Even if they go fly a plane, they do a risk analysis before they do it. What's the risk scale of 1 to 10 for things like weather, personnel, outside factors. And a lot of that's filtering into the private sector. Even some private pilots now are doing a risk analysis before a small flight. Even if you're going to fly, 2 towns over just to, go to a restaurant, they'll do a risk analysis. How do I feel? Am I tired? Am I paying attention? Am I distracted? Do I feel rushed? Is the weather going to be good? Is my plane in good condition? Little risk analysis for any kind of event is helpful. You don't want to obsess over risk, but looking at things that could be potential losses and offsetting those with decision making might be a good way to go financially and otherwise. So much appreciated. Again, glad to have you on our channel. If you like what you see, make sure you follow us or subscribe. We're on multiple channels. We're on Facebook. We're on YouTube. We're on Rumble. We're on Twitter. You'll see our videos. And check out our websites. The one that everybody likes is Actual Human. You can talk to an actual person about very professional licensed subjects. And we'll see you on the next video tomorrow.
Are you tired of automated systems and chatbots when you need assistance? Experience actualhuman.com and connect with real professionals, not automation. At actualhuman.com, we bring you a network of professionals who are excited to answer your questions and provide guidance. Getting started is easy. Let us show you how. Here's how it works. Step 1. Select the best date and time for your video call. Step 2. Describe your situation and the areas you're looking for advice. Step 3. Connect one-on-one with an expert and get the undivided attention that you deserve. Experience the difference. Visit actualhuman.com